warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih atas kehadiran tuan-tuan dan puan-puan sekalian yang saya nampak, dan juga speakers yang akan datang, juga kita jemput semua. Jadi hari ini kita akan memulakan syarahan kedua, our second lecture. Jadi second lecture oleh Profesor Datuk Seri Dr. Muhammad SALLEH YAAPAR yang bertajuk Malay Maritime and Navigation History. This lecture is part of 17 lecture series from August until December 2022, and this is part of the project Tanah Air, the Malay Maritime Civilization project. This project comprises several things. The main thing is the lecture series, where we invited speakers from mainly from the Malay archipelago. One of which is Dr. Magdalani is here in front of me, and we've invited many others from the Philippines, from Indonesia, and many from Malaysia. The idea behind this this project is to get us into a conversation to renew and redefine and re-understand Malay civilization, memahami semula tamadun peradaban Melayu, because many would compare Malay civilization with other civilizations. But one of the things that we can understand, and we understand Malay civilization, is to look at Malay civilization as a maritime civilization, which is different from land-based or landlocked civilization, which is also different from other modern maritime civilizations. Perhaps toward the end of this project, we will get a clearer picture of the characteristic of Malay Malay civilization in the maritime context. There are several objectives of this project, Tanah Air. Because we are looking into the Tanah and the Air that pervades the Malay archipelago, the Malay world, or perhaps we want to call it as the Malay Benua, or Benua or Wenua, which is also a vocabulary in several other languages, especially in the Pacific region. The Maori call it Wenua, which is equivalent to Benua Melayu. One is to provide a continuous consciousness on the subject of Malay civilization and Malay maritime civilization. That's why it is held over a prolonged period. And the other is to document and produce and to publish a number of publications, one of which the outcome is a book from this series of lectures. We're also looking into, this is a long-term project, at initiating some form of a manifestation of Malay maritime society and civilization. Example would be a Malay maritime museum, which I think is long overdue that we need. So this will involve several parties, and also although this has been done, but it's good to construct and reconstruct Malay vessels. I know that Pulau Duyung and Terengganu have, I think, 2 boats have been constructed, and they have sailed all over the world. Indonesia has constructed a boat that they based on the motif from the Borobudur, and we can also construct Malay boat using traditional technology, but it's seaworthy that it can be used to sail and connect and reconnect Malay communities. So with that in mind, we invite Professor Dato Sri SALLEH YAAPAR. I'll give some introduction to Professor Dato Sri SALLEH YAAPAR. Professor SALLEH YAAPAR is a well-known scholar who has deliberated on subjects on Malay civilization and Malay maritime society over the years, and we may have heard some of his lectures and some of his perspectives. This title, Malay Maritime and Navigation History, is one perspective that we thought would be very interesting, which will complement very much the project. Professor Dato Sri Muhammad SALLEH YAAPAR is Professor of Comparative Literature at University of Science Malaysia. He is also a member of the International Advisory Council, as well as a distinguished fellow at the International Institute of Thought and Civilization, ISTAC. And he's essentially a friend of ISTAC at the International Islamic University. He is the first recipient of the Malay Language Academic Personality Award, Ministry of Education. He was formerly chairman of the Board of Governors, Dewan Bahasa dan Pustaka, and holder of the European Chair of Malay Studies at Leiden University, Netherlands. Prior to that, he was Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Development, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Student Affairs, and Dean of the School of Humanities at University of Science Malaysia. Professor Muhammad SALLEH obtained his Bachelor of Arts Honours from the University of Malaya, Master of Arts, University of the Philippines, Quezon City, and is very fortunate to be educated in another part of the Malay archipelago. I thought that where we were educated would be instrumental in also our worldview. So this is where I know we can listen to Prof. SALLEH in terms of how the milieu in the Philippines. We have to be conscious that the Philippines is part of the Malay world, and also at Temple University, Philadelphia, where he obtained his Doctor of Philosophy with distinction. His areas of specialization are comparative literature, literary theory, and literature of the Malay world. Some of his books are Poetry and Mysticism, a hermeneutical reading of the poems of Amir Hamzah, 1995 and 2015. This is available in the bookshops. And Pilgrimage to the Orient, 2009. He has published in international journals such as Journal of Management, Spirituality and Religion, International Journal of Applied Psychoanalytic Studies, Asian Journal of Social Science, the Muslim World, Indonesia, and the Malay World, Kunapi, Journal of Postcolonial Writing and Culture, International Journal of Cross-Cultural Management, and Indonesian Journal of Islam and Muslim Societies. Professor Muhammad SALLEH is currently the Editor-in-Chief of Malay Literature, the journal, and was the Editor-in-Chief of Melayu, Journal Antarabangsa Dunia Melayu. At the same time, he sits on the board of ISTAC's journal, Al-Sajarah, and the editorial board of Kemanusiaan, Asian Journal of the Humanities. Professor SALLEH has also a fine written on him. The book is Rainbows of Malay Literature and Beyond, 5 Shrift in honor of Professor Muhammad SALLEH YAAPAR, 2014. With that, we present the floor to Professor Muhammad SALLEH with the title Malay Maritime and Navigation History. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Prof. Dato Dr. Ahmad Murad American as the moderator. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very pleasant afternoon. Again, Prof. Dato Dr. Ahmad Murad American as the moderator for the lecture series. Fellow speakers, friends and colleagues, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh again. But to begin with, I would like to take this opportunity to thank ISTAC, IIUM, for inviting me to participate in this very prestigious lecture series, a 2-year kind of project, Dato' Ahmad, insyaAllah. Alhamdulillah. I would like also to thank Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Director, for his intention to be with us afterward, insyaAllah, hopefully. All right, now to go right to the business. I have been given the opportunity to speak on this topic, which I love very much actually. I'm using my PowerPoint, Dato'.
Yeah.
Okay. The title is Malay Maritime and Navigation History. All right. Inshallah, we'll go straight to the point. Of course, we begin with a prologue. The Malays are made up of a huge racial group, originally based in Benua Sunda, already mentioned by Dato' just now, Sundaland, now normally referred to as the Malay Archipelago. Since the last ice age, which is around 12,000 years ago, the Malays have been widely scattered, unfortunately or fortunately, widely scattered in the Indian as well as the Pacific Ocean, that is within the Malayo-Polynesian world. Amazingly, to the north as far up as Taiwan, to the south still New Zealand, where you will be meeting our cousins, the Maoris. To the east as far as Easter Island, and to the west till Madagascar. So north, south, east, west. This is the Malayo-Polynesian world. There is no other world which is as huge as this, actually. Their civilizational activities and achievements, especially the core Malays in the archipelago, have long been known and of interest to the outside world, some of which I will afterward reflect on this. Now, thematically, this lecture will concentrate, as Dato' Ahmad Murad already mentioned, on Malay maritime and navigation history, as reflected in their socio-economic activities and civilizational developments. In the discussion, the term Malays or Malayu specifically refers to the core group in the Malay archipelago. But once in a while, or to a certain extent, or to a certain degree, would include also those within the rest of the Malayo-Polynesian world, wherever appropriate, inshallah. Now, historically, the Malays and their land within the archipelago were already known worldwide, at least since the 2nd century. But as you will see afterward, even earlier also, but at least within the 2nd century, it has been acknowledged widely. The Greco-Egyptian scholar Ptolemy, for example, born 90 and then passed away in 168 CE, the Common Era. For example, in his famous book, Geographia, written in 1530 2 of the Common Era already talk about the Malays and referred to the Malay land as Malayu Koloni. Malayu, yeah? Specifically, the term refers to the western part of the Golden Coastlands, Golden Peninsula, or Nusa Kencana, the Malay Peninsula. Interestingly, the name Kunlun, Malays, not exactly the same term actually, but more or less refers to the same people, has also been recorded in Nanshowi Wushi by one Zin, not one Muhammad Zain, yeah, but one Zin, Z-H-E-N, a very well-known Chinese historian of the 3rd century. Ptolemy came in the 2nd century, this one in the 3rd century. Yeah. And please refer to Wang Gongwu. In both accounts, the Malays were recognized and highlighted for their maritime abilities and navigation skills. Prof. Muhammad, alhamdulillah. Precisely as what you have mentioned. Now, the recognition. Sorry. The recognition is in line with their geographical location and professional orientation as a people mostly scattered on islands within a large ocean of a huge archipelago. A large ocean, or in fact 2 or 3 oceans, yeah, of the huge archipelago. But more significantly, it also fits their natural orientation as a seafarers. Wira Samudra in Malay, seafarers. And as a people who refer to their mother country as Tanah Air, land water, not only land, Tanah Air. And this is also true even within the context of modern day Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, Singapore, Southern Philippines, so on and so forth. Until now, they still refer to their mother country as Tanah Air, wherever they are, regardless whether they are in Malaysia or Indonesia or Brunei. Now, in terms of nation building and foreign relations, as early as 535 BCE, before the Common Era. This is why I mentioned just earlier on just now, not only 2nd century CE, but even before CE, 535, the Malays already had Kerajaan Kedah Tua, ancient Kedah Kingdom, where, towards the northwestern side of the peninsula. The kingdom was already engaged in export-oriented iron smelting activities as early as 535. Of course, much later in the 7th century, there was a kingdom known by the name Melayu near Jambi in Sumatra. Just now was on the peninsula. And it was later incorporated into a bigger entity or kingdom, in fact empire, called Sriwijaya, based at the nearby Palembang, not far away from Jambi. Now, though based in Sumatra, the Maritime Empire had tremendous influence on other islands in the archipelago, as well as on Champa in present-day Indochina. Champa was a Malay polity at that time. In Java, its king, Dharan Indra, built the Borobudur in 770 CE. And interestingly, the monument, which the famous Samudra Raksa, that is ocean giant, Samudra Raksa, the one already mentioned by Ratu Ahmad just now. Famous Samudra Raksa ship relief was completed in 825 CE, and Sriwijaya remained in power until the 14th century with a lasting unifying effect on the Malay archipelago and also part of Indochina. Now, as symbolized by the Samudra Raksa ship relief, Samudra Raksa ship relief is there on the left. Yeah. On the wall of the Borobudur, Sriwijaya had a long history of maritime trade and religious ties with significant countries such as India, China, and the Islamic Caliphate states in the Middle East. Around 860 CE, for example, Sri Maharaja Balaputra built a monastery at Nalanda University in Bihar, India. Boleh tak boleh nampak muka saya sikit? Okay. In fact, long before that, Sriwijaya had been the stopping point for Chinese Buddhist traders and pilgrims on their way to India. In 671 CE, for example, a Tang dynasty monk, Yi Seng, stopped by Sriwijaya on his way to Nalanda to study Buddhism. In Sriwijaya, he studied Sanskrit, Malay language, which is Pallava script, and Buddhism for 6 months before proceeding to India on a large ship belonging to the Raja of Sriwijaya, or the Emperor of Sriwijaya. Later, Iseng returned to Sriwijaya and stayed from 689 to 695 CE, studying and translating books on various aspects of Buddhism under the supervision of a Srivijayan high monk, Sakya Kirti, the author of Hasta Danda Sastra, a book on religious law. That is, illustrated image of Sakya Kirti. I wonder whether that is for real or not. I took it from Google. All right. Like the 3rd century ones then, Iseng referred to the Malays as Kunlun. Regarding their appearance, he noted that, I quote, Kunlun people have curly hair. The Malays have curly hair, dark bodies, bare feet, and they wear sarongs. This description fits the famous sketch of a Lankasuka diplomat to Liang Dynasty, China. That was 526 to 539. Like Iseng, generally, the Tang Dynasty Chinese were already familiar with the Malays, as well as with the ships which they referred to as Kunlun Po. We'll know more about this Kunlun Po afterwards. Meanwhile, Islam came to the archipelago as early as 674 CE, with the establishment of a Muslim settlement in Sumatra, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. However, intensive Islamic da'wah was started only in the early 12th century. Thus, slowly Hinduism and Buddhism was replaced by Islam. Now, local documents indicate that the first Malay states to accept Islam were Samudra and Prologue in Sumatra, but later the states were merged as Pasai. The process of Islamization was stepped up during the Sultanate of Malacca in the 15th century. And this is important now. Malacca soon replaced Sriwijaya, which ceased to exist in the 14th century. Its entrepot was for a long time a thriving trading center, a meeting point between merchants from China, India, Arabia, Persia, and even Europe. With the traders also came Islamic preachers. Thus, from Malacca, Islam, as well as the Malay language, using the Jawi script, were quickly spread to the 4 corners of the archipelago. This is more or less the illustration from Malacca. You're all familiar with this. But unfortunately, in 1511, Malacca was attacked, captured, and colonized by the Portuguese. It was later taken over by the Dutch and finally colonized by the British until Malaysia independent in 1957. Now, at the time of the Portuguese attack, Malacca was still a bubbling maritime trading center, a Venice of the East, with merchants coming from all over the world. Now, this lecture, friends and colleagues, will now focus on Malay maritime history. There will be two sections. One is Malay maritime history. The other one is Malay navigation history. Malay maritime history started in the 3rd century BCE, before the Common Era, alongside and in close association with Malay navigation. Remember, I already mentioned about Kedah Tua just now. In fact, trade or commerce was the main motivation for the Malays to navigate across 7 oceans. Malays always like to refer navigating across 7 oceans. And to travel as far away as China, India, the Islamic Caliphate states, and even Madagascar. Generally, wherever they went, the Malay navigators and sailors carried with them local products from the Malay archipelago, or those that were brought to their shores, and those which they purchased from overseas. They will make sure that wherever they went, they would carry this thing. Now, historians indicate that in the 1st century CE, vast fleets of Malay outrigger ships went back and forth to Aden or Yemen in the Middle East, and some Malays even settled there. This is according to at least Schaeffer, 1996. What were they doing at that time? They were supplying the Middle Eastern and Mediterranean markets, mainly with cinnamon, that is kayu manis, a popular spice product among the people there. Inshallah. So this is an image of an outrigger ship. Now, at the same time, Malay sailors also traveled to as far as East African coastal states, as well as to Madagascar, where many of them settled down, especially in Madagascar. Now, aside from cinnamon, they always carried with them various other flora and fauna items, including bananas, coconuts, cocoyam, that is keladi, and chicken, as well as the famous Malayo-Polynesian musical instrument, the xylophone. Now, aside from economic gains, the Malay trading activities had long-lasting socio-cultural impacts too. Is it possible? Yes, it is. For example, the Malay word mentioned above, that is kayu manis, was adapted into Greek, not into any Arabic dialects, but into Greek. Adapted as what? As canela. When I did some research, it was ultimately derived from Malay through Phoenician and Hebrew languages. Similarly, another word, eddy, that is the Igbo word for ecosystem, cocoyam, yeah, is derived from the Malay word keladi. So at least, yeah, you have canela and keladi. Canela was borrowed and adapted into Greek. Keladi was adapted into Igbo as eddy. Now, as indicated earlier, socio-culturally, Malay communities who settled in Madagascar contributed even more, for they themselves became the ancestors of the present-day Malagasy or marina people who dominate the huge island nation. Now, I would like to talk a little bit longer on them now. And the Malay Polynesian Ma'anyan language, which their ladies, 30 of them, brought from Lembah Barito, that is the Borneo part of Sriwijaya, is still widely spoken in the island nation. And it is currently referred to as Malagasy or Marina language. And this is certified by Otto Christian Dahl, at least by 1991. I managed to get some illustration here, and I wrote something down there. From Borneo to Madagascar, ancient Malay ladies crossing the Indian Ocean. These ladies were from Borneo, and I mentioned earlier on the Lembah Barito, which is in the present day part of Borneo, which belongs to Indonesia. But at that time, there was no such thing as Malaysia or Indonesia. There was the time of Sriwijaya. Okay, and the ladies were speaking Ma'anyan, a dialect of our Dayak people. Okay. Now here they are. Aside from language, in Madagascar, the settlers' succeeding generations, as shown below, retain even up to now most of the cultural wisdom and traditions, including in shipbuilding and navigation, architecture, costumes, and ceremonies. I am very delighted to present to all of you here these two photographs. One on the left is a Marina family, with baby down there at the back, attended by his mother or her mother, and probably a sister in front here. This is how they look like now, at least some of them. But on the left, you have a very handsome young man, actually, and he was the 7th president of Madagascar. That was between 1916 to 1920. His name is Rajolina, Henri Rajolina, very handsome person. Okay, these are our cousins actually. Now I mentioned just now that they retain a lot of things, including architecture and also shipbuilding. So you have here a typical marina house, which is very much like a Malay house, actually. And also there is a shipyard here in Antalaha, on one of the beaches in Madagascar. So they are doing very much like what the Malays are doing, in fact. Inshallah. Okay. Now I managed to get a picture of these two people. Here is a picture of the mariners of Madagascar with the Ma'anyan cousins of Borneo in similar ceremonial costumes. I managed to get this from Facebook, belonging to a person calling himself or herself Anak Borneo. And he always celebrates the relationship between the Marina of Madagascar and the Dayak Ma'anyan of Borneo. So the Marina of Madagascar, the one in red shirts and all those, actually are cousins of this one. They still speak more or less the same language. The Marina language is basically Ma'anyan. There's a lot of Malay terms there inside. All right, thank you. So the 30 Ma'anyan ladies or of the Srivijayan period were actually repeating the maritime activities of their prehistoric ancestors. I have mentioned a little bit earlier on. Prehistoric ancestors who traveled and migrated from Benua Sunda about 12,000 years ago. And they went to various parts of the world, including actually Madagascar as well. But the one I mentioned earlier just now is the second trip probably made by these 50 ladies from Borneo. Now, specifically, since the last ice age, their ancestors have been widely scattered in the Indian and Pacific Ocean within the Malayo-Polynesian world. I have already said this earlier on, but no problem in repeating. To the north as far up as Taiwan, to the south till New Zealand, to the east as far as Easter Island, and to the west till Madagascar, covering about 2/3 of the southern hemisphere. So Malays should be proud of this. They have their cousins everywhere here. And the Maoris are their cousins down south in New Zealand. The Hawaiians also are their cousins. In fact, King Kalaulau early in the last century was very, very happy to meet the Sultan of Johor, and they claimed themselves to be lost Malay brothers. All right. We go on now. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. As indicated in the previous section, in East Asia, now I'm taking you to East Asia, the Malays had long been trading with the Chinese. In fact, they were the first to initiate the shuttle trade with the East Asian giant, specifically in the 3rd century CE. I'm now focusing on the Malays of the archipelago. In a long history of Malay commercial activities with China, among agricultural products exported to the country were rice and areca nut, including its palm, known in Malay language as pokok pinang. This pokok pinang has a very interesting story. Rice and its plants also, that is pokok padi, were mostly exported to the southern region of China by the Champa Malays, specifically during the Song dynasty from 960 to 1279. They were very interested in the Champa variety for various reasons. First, it was drought resistant. Second, it ripened even faster than the existing local Chinese varieties. Third and finally, it could be cultivated on terraces around hilly slopes. Thus, by 1012, the Champa rice was introduced even in the lower Yangtze and Hui River regions. So very, very much favored by the Chinese. Now, the other agricultural product exported by the Malay maritime traders to China was the areca nut, which I have mentioned earlier, and its palm, the pokok. The product was so well received that the palm was extensively cultivated, especially in Guangdong, Yunnan, and Fujian. In fact, even the Malay term pinang was adapted and became binglang in Mandarin. When Admiral Ching Ho came here, also he used this term binglang to refer to Pulau Pinang, to our state in Penang here, Binglang. Okay. Now, Malay maritime trade was at one of its heights during the Sriwijaya period, which in China more or less coincided with the Tang and Song dynasties. Srivijaya's power was based on its control of international sea trade of the day. The main concern was to secure highly lucrative trade arrangements with China and to a certain extent India and Arabia in order to serve the large markets. And this was possible with natural products collected from Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and the Eastern Islands, as well as those gathered at Srivijaya's entrepot, such as Boga, the capital city, and Kadaram or Kedah Tua from neighboring countries. So some were locally produced, some were brought in from the neighboring countries. Now, other than natural products, and this is very interesting, and not many people have spoken about this or written about this, but I have been teaching to my students. Other than natural products, Sriwijaya also exported human resources to China. These include laborers, household servants, security guard, martial art experts, but they were all commonly referred to by the Chinese as Kunlun No, meaning Malay slave. Yeah. Or if we want to be a little bit, sounds a little bit better, Malay servants. Now, during the Tang dynasty, numerous Kunlun or Malays or Melayu from the Malay archipelago traveled back and forth to China. Many resided there, especially in Guangdong. Among them, the martial arts experts and security guards were a very special class of people. Very, very special. Now, their prowess impressed the Chinese and became the source of inspirations to many different artists. First, to the amulet makers, and especially the literary authors. Secondly, of the wuxia or chivalric romance in general. An interesting example of the wuxia, this is my area, comparative literature, is the famous story of the Kunlun No by P. Zing, 825, and he passed away 880 CE. This wuxia portrays a Malay security guard come martial arts expert named Malay. And he was invulnerable, capable of flying, and has other supernatural abilities. This could be read now in the Kunlun Slave, edited by Liu Ju and his or her friend. This literary piece had been a main source for other artistic pieces and has now been adapted into a movie even in our 21st century. And the movie is called The Promise, or titled The Promise, produced in 2005, but with Malay's name now changed to Kunlun. Kunlun, remember, means Malay, simply Malay. Yeah. Malay was more specific a name. Yeah. Now I have included here two illustrations. One on my left is Malay in P. Zing's chivalric romance, flying from roof to roof with his master. He is the one at the bottom there. There are three people flying there. Malay is the one at the bottom. He is carrying his master, Chui, and the master's sweetheart. Yeah, the master's sweetheart. Okay, when the story was adapted into a movie, with the title of The Promise, his name is changed to Kunlun, but we can still see him moving as he was in the literary work. Kunlun in the movie, The Promise, adapted from Pising's 9th century romance. And he flies left and right, up and down, and carrying and same two persons. But finally, he would carry only one person, that is the lady. But finally, the lady fell in love with him. Okay, this is a romance, Huzia, written not by Malays, but by Pising. And The Promise, as a movie, also was made by the Chinese. Okay, go ahead. Now from China, we move now to India. Aside from China, the Malays also had strong commercial ties, mercantile or ties with India. In fact, Malay maritime trade with India goes back even further, as revealed by the recent findings of the Global Archaeological Research Center, GARC, University of Science Malaysia. It should have started at least around 1,900 years ago, involving especially the kingdom of Kedah Tua in the north of the Malay Peninsula. The kingdom was known as Kadaram to ancient Indians, Kalaha to ancient Arabs, and Chiah to ancient Chinese. Its name was mentioned early in Sanskrit literary works such as the famous Kata Sarit Sagara, which was introduced to most Malay scholars whenever they start studying about Malay literature, meaning ocean of stories, Kata Sarit Sagara. Later in the 12th century, it was also recorded by Al-Idrisi, an Arab traveler and geographer, among others in his book Ar-Rujar, written in 1154. Now at around 535 BCE, Kedah Tua Kingdom, located at present-day Lembah Bujang, was already a cosmopolitan entrepôt, exporting iron, beads, manik, especially from Sungai Manik. Sungai Manik is still around. Rattan, resin, areca nuts, spang wood, elephants, ivory, and other local products to India and the Middle East, and even to Safola, that is modern-day Mozambique. Strategically located between India and China, Kedah Tua served merchants from both east and west. Colleagues and friends, USM's finding at the Sungai Batu archaeological site in Lembah Bujang since 2009 confirm a very vibrant iron smelting and other metallurgical activities, as well as maritime trading activities in the vicinity back to 4 centuries BCE. Sungai Batu is so far the oldest civilization site in Southeast Asia. As explained by the director of CARC, Professor Dato Dr. Muhammad Saidin, various other ancient relics have been discovered in Lembah Bujang by using the optically stimulated luminescence OSL technique. This includes, I'm only including those that are related to this discussion. This includes those representing maritime activities, which also include administrative blocks, warehouses, jetties, and even sunken ships or barges, and religious or ritual structures. Generally, the ancient ships or barges measure about 40 to 50 feet in length. It is believed that these are relics of some of the vessels used to transport commodities in the maritime trade with India, the Middle Eastern state, and also China. Apparently, the kingdom was populated by both locals as well as foreigners who arrived during different periods from India and the Middle East. In the 7th century, the kingdom was subjugated by Sriwijaya, or incorporated into Sriwijaya. However, maritime trade went on uninterrupted for centuries. And Kedah Tua benefited not only from the normal maritime activities, but also from trans-peninsular routeways developed along the Muda and Patani rivers. This enhanced the India-China trade. It was an advantage to Kedah Tua. This could be seen on the map located on my left. Okay, we'll go ahead. In 1025 CE, Rajendra Chola I, or the first, or the Chola dynasty from Tamil Nadu, India, launched naval raids on ports of Sriwijaya. The aggressive king and his forces managed to occupy Kedah Tua for some time, and this weakened the Malay kingdom and finally led to the decline of the maritime trading activities. It is clear that the main motive for the Chola king to attack Kedah and other Srivijayan ports was to forcefully gain control of their bubbling commercial activities. Now, Malay maritime trade was revived, however, much later, with the establishment of Malacca in the 15th century. And beginning from around 1400 CE, successive sultans of Malacca did their best to attract maritime traders from China, India, the Islamic Caliphate states, and Europe. Come over to Malacca. From time to time, entrepot infrastructure and managements were upgraded, and maritime policies and laws were enhanced. Kita ada undang-undang Malacca and so on. Steps were taken to protect Malacca's water from pirates and piracy. Diplomatic relations were strategically established with significant countries such as China, Japan, India, Turkey, and the Islamic Caliphate states. Thus, Malacca quickly became an international maritime trading center with Malay merchants carrying their products near and far. Up to the beginning of the 16th century, maritime trading business at Malacca Entrepot was always bubbling. As Simon Elegant puts it, quoting from Protesua, Suma Orientals of Tom Perez, 5 centuries ago, Malacca hosted 2,000 ships each day. Cargoes of kulit buah pala, nutmeg, bunga cengkeh, clove, sandalwood, kayu cendana, tea, porcelain, and so on and so forth, passed through Malacca on their way to Europe. From the islands of the archipelago to the south came camphor, bird's nest, pepper, lada hitam, mas, kasturi, gold and ivory, gadi, mas dan gadi. And from the west, mostly carried by traders from South Asia and the Middle East, came cotton, weapons, incense, setangi, opium, dyes, silver, and medicinal herbs. The description goes on, and I don't think I need to read the one at the bottom there. I'll be repeating. Now this is an image of Malacca of the time. Indeed, there was Malacca, the Malay maritime powerhouse in the 15th century, succeeding Sriwijaya. As such, it is not difficult to understand why the contemporary Portuguese chronicler, Tom Peres, made it clear to his readers that whoever is Lord of Malacca shall have his hands on the throats of Venice. Similarly, it is not difficult to understand now why Alfonso de Albuquerque was so eager in attacking Malacca. And we do not need to go to that part because everyone knows. Now, the lecture will move on to Malay navigation. I'm done with Malay maritime history. So, Dato' Moderator, friends and colleagues, to discuss Malay navigation in the past, it is important to note that it was closely related to international maritime commerce going back at least to the 3rd century BCE, which I mentioned earlier. During this time, there was already a network of maritime trade routes stretching all the way from Western Europe to East Asia and down the east coast of Africa. Within this very early and vast network, Malay navigators and traders were already very much in action. This is not coming from me, it comes from various sources. For example, in discussing Chinese maritime commerce and shipping during the Han Dynasty, that is from 206 BCE to 221 BC, John E. Hill, for example, points out that, and this is very important for everyone to remember. I quote, Roman and Arab ships dominated the Egypt to India trade, but most of the trade between India and China was carried by Malay, Indonesian, and Indian ships. The Indonesian actually is also Malay. Yeah? It seems it was only later that Chinese ships regularly traveled to India. It was rare, however, for Chinese or Roman citizens to make the complete round-trip journey between China and Egypt, which was actually dominated by the Malays. Now we go on, following Hill. Hill goes on to say that some of these ships were very large for their day and are said to have carried up to 1,000 passengers and cargoes of over 1,000 tons. Friends and colleagues, this is in line with the observation made by the Chinese historian mentioned earlier, Wang Zhen. According to the Chinese historian, the Kunluns were great shipbuilders. Kunlun referring to the Malaysia. They built and sailed large vessels, according to the historian, known as Kunlun Po. The Chinese call them Kunlun Po. They built and sailed large vessels known as Kunlun Po, yeah, meaning large Malay ships measuring 200 feet long. This is a Chinese historian speaking. 20 feet high above water, with 4 sails and cargo of 900 tons and 600 to 700 people. This is recorded by Wang Wu. The illustration below is coming from my imagination. It's a possible image of a Kunlun Po, with 4 sails. Okay, we go ahead. Indeed, the Malays were among the first people to be involved in giant-sized shipbuilding, advanced navigation, and long-distance maritime trade. According to Linda Noreen Schaeffer, 1996, at least by the 3rd century BCE, the Chinese have witnessed Kunlun sailors and traders approaching the shores in huge Kunlun boats from the so-called Kunlun Islands in the southern seas. The Chinese were also aware of the fact that the Malays were exceptional navigators. As sailors, they were not technically equipped. This is very, very special. Yeah. They were not technically equipped with compasses, maps, or charts. Rather, they sailed and journeyed across oceans only with the aid of the so-called celestial navigation. Again, as Schaeffer puts it, quoting from Taylor, I quote, "The Malay sailors were highly skilled navigators, sailing over the oceans for thousands of miles without a compass or written chart. They navigated by the wind and the stars, by the shape and color of the clouds, by the color of the water, and by the swell and wave patterns on the ocean's surface." Interestingly, they could locate an island when they were still like 30 miles from its shores. How? By analyzing the behavior of various birds, the animals and plant life in the water, and the patterns of swell and wave. Again from Schaeffer. So they were not technically equipped actually. They used what is referred to as celestial navigation. The Chinese of the time were also aware of the fact that the Malays were also skilled and innovative builders of the large ocean-going vessels, which they referred to as Kunlun. In fact, the Chinese have learned a lot about shipbuilding technology from the Malays. Again, this comes from Schaeffer, and as Schaeffer puts it, quoting from Johnston, the Chinese also knew these islanders as builders and as crew of ocean-going vessels engaged in long-distance overseas trade. The Chinese, in fact, appear to have learned much from these sailors. The Malays independently invented a sail made from woven mats reinforced with bamboo at least several hundred years BCE. And by the time of the Han Dynasty, the Chinese were already copying and using such sails. There was a quotation. Now, 3rd century CE Chinese descriptions of the Malay vessels indicate that they were of the type called Jong, J-O-N-G. And to remind all of us, Jong is a Malay term, but later adapted by European languages as Jang. And they attributed it to the Chinese, whereas the Chinese got it from the Malays, actually. A typical Jong is a large vessel with multi-layered hull. Again, as Schaeffer puts it, quoting from Mandarin, on average, this is a profile of a Jong, typical Jong. On average, the Jong could carry 400 to 500 metric tons, but at least one was large enough to carry 1,000 tons. The planks of the ships were joined with dowels. No metal was used in their construction, hanya kayu-kayu saja. Dan kalau ada paku pun tak ada. Paku pun buat dengan kayu. On some of the smaller vessels, parts might be lashed together with vegetable fibers, but this was not typical of a larger ship. The Jongs usually had from 2 to 4 masts, plus a bowsprit, as well as 2 rudders mounted on each side. Outrigger devices designed to stabilize a vessel were used on many ships but probably were not characteristic of ships that sail in rough oceans. Again, from okay, I managed to get here an image from Google. This is a Srivijayan Jung in the making. Aside from the above, in the history of international navigation, Malay sailors were also known as the first to use the balance luck. The balance luck sailed for their huge ships. And these huge ships, again, are the jung and the galleys, the galleys. Jung is original Malay name, galleys is taken from the West. This has been recognized as an innovative invention. I'm talking about the balance luck as an innovative invention of global significance. Again, as explained by Schaeffer, balance lucks are square sail set fore and after and tilted down at the end. They can be pivoted sideways, which makes it possible to sail into the oncoming wind at an angle of attack against the wind. So even if it's very, very windy, they could still go on. Yeah? To sail at an angle first one way and then the other in a zigzag pattern. So as to go into the direction from which the wind is blowing. You didn't have to stop sailing. Because of the way the sides of the sails were tilted, from a distance, it looked somewhat triangular. It's quoting from Schaeffer. Now, the Malay square balance luck is not only significant in that it could be used to sail into the oncoming wind, but more than that, it also has given the inspiration to the triangular lateen sails later developed by sailors of other nations and regions. The illustration above shows a jung with balance lucks. Now to continue, Malay ingenuity in navigation was still there to be seen during the Malacca Sultanate, the Sultanate of Malacca in the 15th century. The size of the ships also remained the same. Mendam berahi, or suppressed desire, or suppressed passion. The famous ocean-going galley of Sultan Mansur Shah, always used by Hang Tuah on diplomatic missions, about 1414 diplomatic missions, for example, was 360 feet long. The Mendam berahi was 360 feet long and 36 feet wide, with 3 sails, 100 paddles on the left and the right, and a capacity for 400 crew, 7 fighters, as well as more than 10 elephants. According to the Hikayat Hang Tuah, when Hang Tuah was dispatched to go to Siam, he came back with 10 elephants. So on the illustration there is the galley called Mendam berahi, with Hang Tuah taking the 10 elephants back to Malacca. So on the left, there is also a Mendam berahi illustration. Now, to go back to the Mendam berahi, the whereabouts of the famous Mendam berahi is not known now. That is unfortunate. But to me, nevertheless, it is a national treasure. We have to hunt for it. Its description in Hikayat Hang Tuah is detailed and clear. As may be seen above, the 2 illustrations there, many technical drawings have been done by concerned artists. pelukis-pelukis yang prihatin. Thus, its replica should be a high priority national agenda now. And I've spoken about this at 2 or 3 places. Yeah. It should be high priority national agenda. In fact, it should replace the replica of Flor de la Mar, ocean flower, in Malacca, constructed more than 10 years ago. And what they constructed is actually, or was actually, a ship used by the Portuguese to attack and conquer the Sultanate of Malacca. So I would like to draw everybody's attention, yeah, to help out in the campaign now. That is the campaign to build a replica for Menam Berahi. There are other galleys and jongs, yeah, but at least Menam Berahi, the most famous of all Malay jongs and galleys. And this should replace the Flor de la Mar constructed in Malacca. Okay. Next, like Menam Berahi, generally Malay galleys and jongs of Malacca was still bigger than Chinese ships. Bigger than Chinese ships all the time. Thus, according to Portuguese chronicler Tom Pires again, in Canton, Malay vessels were usually asked to anchor far from the harbour. Why? Because their big size could be dangerous to Chinese ships. That was during the time of Malacca. Before that was even bigger. Okay. In fact, Malacca's galleys and jongs were also bigger compared to Portuguese galleons. In fact, 3 times bigger. Menam Berahi is 3 times bigger than Flor de la Mar, for example. So that's the reason why when he was in the midst, I'm talking about Afonso de Albuquerque, was in the midst of attacking Malacca, for example, he was shocked to see that, he didn't, no one mentioned about him seeing, watching Menam Berahi, but he was, at least he was able to see some other jong, especially those coming from Java. He was shocked to see them and referred to them as world shakers. As world shakers. Okay. Now, friends and colleagues, the discussion above has clearly shown the great achievements of Malay navigation, as well as the sophisticated navigational skill of Malay navigators in general. Now, to end the whole lecture series, lecture number 2, it is important or appropriate to highlight the success story of the greatest of all modern navigators. And I'm referring to Enrique de Malacca. Enrique, whose real name is still not known, yeah, friends are still searching for it. Inshallah, one day we will be able to come across the name. He is the first person in the whole world to have succeeded in taking a 650-degree trip in circumnavigating the globe. And when was it? It was in 1521. It was he who was able to do it, not his European master, Ferdinand Magellan, whose name is always repeated every year. Yeah, when people commemorate the circumnavigation, Magellan's name is mentioned, but that is not true. And fortunately, this year, 2021, marks the event's 500th anniversary. Thus, to me, befitting a consensual commemoration. And please replace Ferdinand Magellan's name with Enrique de Malacca. Why did I say it? The explanation is like this. But we have to recall. To recall, the Portuguese attacked Malacca in 1511. Within the Portuguese Navy, there was Ferdinand Magellan, who would later start a mission to circumnavigate the globe. On the defending front was a Malay young man of 26 years old. But Malacca fell. After the fall of Malacca, this young man was acquired by Magellan kononnya as a slave, and named Enrique de Malacca. In fact, it's mentioned that he was baptized, become a Christian. But we can still do more research to either throw this piece of information away or to accept it. According to Antonio Pigafetta, which is Magellan's official chronicler from Italy, the young man originated from Sumatra. But Magellan's will written for him, for Enrique, on the 21st of August 1519, before they started sailing, however, indicates that he was a native of Malacca. But to me anyway, from Malacca, the dynamic Malay youth was taken home by Magellan, first to Portugal, then to Spain. To cut the story short, in 1517, Magellan proposed to King Charles V of Spain a mission to circumnavigate the globe via a new route, sailing westwards to the fabulous Molucca, that is Molucco, or Spice Islands, in competition actually with the Portuguese, which was in the Malay archipelago. To strengthen his proposal, Magellan brought along with him and introduced Enrique of Malacca to the king, because he knew that the king would ask him about his capability. Before meeting the king, he brought along with him Enrique. Impressed with Enrique's experience in navigation, knowledge of the local environment, and ability in speaking Malay, Spanish, as well as Portuguese, King Charles immediately agreed with the proposal and funded the whole mission in toto. Thus, Magellan started his famous expedition, which the so-called Armada Molucco, comprising of 5 ships with a crew of 270 on September 20th, 1519. That is exactly 500 years ago. This is one of the illustration about the Armada Molucca, and on the left is Magellan. Now, so they left for the Malay archipelago. The main intention was actually for the pepper trade, rempah-rempah. After a very long and hazardous journey, on March 16, 1521, the expedition team, now left with only 4 ships, sighted the highest peak of Samar Island in what is now the Philippines. That time was not the Philippines yet, just simply a Malay island. The team's movement was soon detected by local chiefs, including Raja Humabon of Cebu Islands. There is a map of Cebu Islands and other neighboring islands, including Mactan, very important one. With Enrique's capability to negotiate in Malay, Magellan met Raja Humabon, who immediately agreed to convert to Christianity and recognize the superiority of the Spanish crown. Meanwhile, Humabon's rival, Dato' Si Lapu-Lapu of Mactan, a Muslim who originated from Borneo, refused to convert to Christianity and to submit to Spain. He refused to do that. But if you read Philippine sources, they will not admit that he was a Muslim. Okay. But his name is Si Lapu-Lapu, not Lapu-Lapu as they usually write it here. Si Lapu-Lapu with CI in front there, sometimes spelled as SI, C. This is an honorific term, signifying that he is of high status, and some local sources would say that because he was more or less a Muslim leader. Okay. Upon Humabon's request, Magellan immediately declared war on Dato' Si Lapu-Lapu. And due to his European arrogance and overconfident with his team's strength, forgetting that it was only 49 fighters. His crew was made up only of 49 fighters. But Magellan agreed to take on the forces of Si Lapu-Lapu, numbering around 1,500 warriors with traditional weapons. And he said, I do not need the help of you, Raja Humabon. You keep away. I want to go and kill this person alone with my forces. Friends and colleagues, thus the Battle of Mactan was launched at dawn on April 27, 1521. It quickly ended with the death of Magellan himself on the beach of Punto Enggan, and of course with Dato' Si Lapu-Lapu as the victor. And for that reason, the Philippine nation later declared him as the first Philippine national hero, with a lot of his images painted and or constructed like this one here. So I have included there two illustrations. One is warrior from Mactan, killing Lapu-Lapu within just a matter of 1 hour, or slightly more, actually. He came with ships, but the ships couldn't come close to the shore because the water was low at that time. Okay. And the winner was, of course, Si Lapu-Lapu. Okay. On May the 7th, 1522, after his death, the broken Spanish team, led by Juan Sebastian Elcano, that's Magellan's deputy, left the islands without Enrique, because Enrique already distanced himself from them. In fact, Enrique somehow became close friends with the two leaders, Lapu-Lapu, and also with Humabon. One and a half year later, in September 1522, the last surviving ship, that is Victoria, limped back to Spain. It was led by the last surviving captain, which was Elcano, with only 18 crew members. Now, friends and colleagues, from the above narration, based mostly on Pigafetta's account, it is clear that Magellan did not complete the circumnavigation of the king. Although every year his name is repeated again and again as the one who completed the navigation. Neither was Elcano, who reached back in Spain 1.5 years after the Mactan incident. So without Magellan, and Elcano, the success story thus belongs to Enrique of Malacca, who is believed to have returned to Malacca. In fact, recent research done by our colleagues from UPM indicates that he came back to Semenanjung and specifically to Negeri Sembilan. But they have still yet to determine that the grave belongs to him. Whatever it is, he came back to the peninsula. But even if he remained in Cebu or Mactan, he could still be regarded as the first person to take a 650-degree trip in circumnavigating the globe. This is because Cebu or Mactan is very much a part of the Malay archipelago, that is Enrique's home region. Besides, it was just a boat. Now, we're coming to the end. The above historical fact was already pointed out by some writers much earlier, but not many parties took it seriously, including those in Enrique's own country of origin. I'm referring to Malaysia, and specifically to Malacca. In the middle of the last century, for example, the fact was mentioned by Stephen Zweig in his book, Conqueror of the Seas, The Story of Magellan, published in 38. He already mentioned about it, reminding people that it was not Magellan, but Enrique. Then about 17 years later, a certain person by the name of C.E. wrote a very short but vivid article in the Straits Times. The title of the article is "First Man to Sail Round the World Was a Malay," and yet nobody took notice of this. Okay, now coming to the last part. More important, early this century, a certain professor by the name of Dr. Joyce Chaplin of Harvard University all of a sudden brought up the matter again. And she reiterated in Bahasa Indonesia. My only source is this one, Bahasa Indonesia. There are two articles, both written in Bahasa Indonesia, of a conversation that some journalists had with this professor. She says, sebenarnya mungkin orang pertama yang berkeliling dunia adalah seorang pria Muslim. Seorang budak yang hanya kita ketahui bernama Enrique di Malacca, milik Ferdinand Magellan, yang diperolehinya selama perang di Malacca. The person just now with the name, not even a name. I do not know who he is or she is, GE. But this lady is very clear. She's not a Malay, but she is now telling us and reminding us again that sebenarnya mungkin orang pertama yang berkeliling dunia adalah seorang pria Muslim. Seorang budak yang hanya kita ketahui bernama Enrique di Malacca, yang diperolehi selama perang di Malacca. So, friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, with the above positive statements from three people, three sources, hopefully this time around Enrique's achievement would be taken seriously and his name would be duly recorded in history books, number 1, including textbooks, number 2, in school. In fact, this is my proposal, my plea. In fact, like si Lapu-Lapu in the Philippines, who has been made the first national hero Enrique of Malacca should also be declared as a national hero by the government of Malaysia. Whether to put him as the first or the second or what, that's okay. But at least he should be declared as a national hero of our country, since it's very clear that he originated from Malacca. Okay. And who said that? Ferdinand himself in his Surat Wasiat. Okay, now I have ended my discussion. It's time for my epilogue. The historical come anthropological discussions above has clearly shown that the great accomplishments of the Malays in the past in maritime activities. They were great maritime traders not only around their home waters, but also in faraway places including China, India, Arabia, and even Madagascar. It is also amazing to discover that their maritime and trading activities did not only bring about monetary gains, but also has had anthropological, social, and cultural impacts on the places and peoples they interacted with. I brought to you the examples of Madagascar. At the same time, the discussion has also shown the sophisticated navigational skills and great achievements of the Malays in pre-modern and modern times. They had extraordinary talent and skill not only in constructing large ships like Mendam Berahi, but also in traveling across oceans ahead of most other people. Now, the crossing over to Madagascar by their women, 50 women, on outrigger ship via the perilous Indian Ocean, for example, was indeed a great feat, difficult to surpass. In fact, along with earlier Malay migrations to Taiwan, New Zealand, and Easter Islands, they had managed to change the demographic scenario of the world, with people of Malay stock now occupying approximately 60% of the confluence of the earth. And all these were achieved without force or violence. The success story of the individual navigator, namely Enrique of Malacca, is also difficult to replace. But I must make this statement that it is unfortunate that the marvelous Malay achievements as navigators and maritime actors are not much discussed or made known to the world now. Even more unfortunate is the fact that the artifacts of their historical achievements, like the ship Mendam Berahi, and other ships, of course, such as Mendam Berahi and other jongs and galleys, are not preserved in maritime museum for future generations. I must take this opportunity to congratulate Indonesia for taking the trouble to reconstruct a replica of the ship which was pictured in on the wall of Borobudur, the Gergasi. They did it, and they constructed a museum, a replica, together with a museum at Magelang. Considering the above situation, it is imperative that immediate and strategic steps be taken collectively by the various authorities in this country and across the Malay world to recover their historic artifacts and to revive their navigational skills and maritime trading spirit. So two sides of the same coin actually. Historic artifacts must be recovered, reinstated, replicas made, and museum open so that people could go and watch them. At the same time, also some kind of campaign must be done to revive their navigational skills and maritime trading spirit. With that, Prof. Ahmad Murad, thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak-banyak semua. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Profesor Bang Salleh YAAPAR for his erudite, enlightening, and always refreshing views and perspectives on this subject. We hope that the relevant authorities are listening to this important contribution.
Hopefully.
And also to take into account the various suggestions which have been long overdue. We hope that these are picked up and formulated in its rightful place. One of the comments which I want to make is that, as rightly pointed out by Dato' SERI, is that I have heard nothing of Panglima Awang being celebrated this year or next year in Malaysia. There are many things coming out from the Philippines. And also Argentina, Chile, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. They started the celebration last year.
Correct.
In fact, they have replicated the voyage. I think Chile have replicated the voyage, and it landed in Indonesia. But nothing is heard from our authorities.
Dato', the Philippines government has invited me to participate in their forum.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah,
when will that be?
Yeah, next month, inshallah.
Next month.
Yeah.
In their quintessential celebration.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I will definitely highlight our contribution.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And they have recognized Panglima Awang, or they call
correct.
it.
Yeah, of course they recognize and they claim it to be theirs.
Yes. So and we have rightly said that it's not the ownership of any individual country in South Asia, but it belongs to the Malay world. And
yes,
we have to take this opportunity after 500 years.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we need to discuss further on this in terms of how the relevant parties in Malaysia can contribute, can establish. Right, I would invite questions and comments. I see. Wait, hold on. Let me. Somebody, Rivani, Dr. Rivani, raise his hand. Yeah. Okay, please go ahead. Yeah, sorry. Dr. Rivani is from USN. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Dato' Prof. Murad. Thank you very much, Prof. Dato' SERI Salleh. I go straight to a question, and which I actually like to add to your reservoir of rich knowledge, Prof. Salleh.
Reservoir.
Ya. Ni Melayu, apa ni, Kepulauan Melayu ni, I get excited. That's the reason I came to Sampris after all, because your invitation, Prof. Salleh. I just want to add another important personality in the Malay maritime world. The first woman admiral, Ku Malahayati, was the first woman admiral in the modern history. She commanded satu battalion armada, more than 100 ships.
From Aceh.
Aceh, betul.
Aceh, yeah.
Aceh itu. What's the name? Inung Bali.
Yeah.
All the janda. Yeah, right. And she was knighted by Lancaster, the government, the British Empire knight. So it's another powerful story. The first woman admiral in the world, modern history lah, modern history. So there's another
yes,
great story. Another great story, Prof. Salleh. I just want to add that one to your reservoir of your slides, maybe. Yeah. And that's a feminist movement sebenarnya, and
thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Salleh. From apa ni, Laksmana Ku Malahayati.
Malahayati, yeah.
Yeah. Which commemorate the Surabaya next to the apa nama ni, the kapal selam, and Surabaya has where Universitas Hang Tuah is, right?
Yes, also, yeah.
Also another part.
We didn't bother to use the name. Yeah,
We never bother.
Yeah.
And Universitas Hang Tuah is the universitas for the Navy.
Yes.
Jadi Indonesian
Surabaya.
Navy angkat Melayu punya palas mana.
Yeah, that's right.
I just want to say that. That's it, just to add the.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mani. Thank you. Yeah, what you said. We in Malaysia we are lacking this consciousness because these are not narrated at the popular level. We're not only talking about the schools, but also as public history, as popular history also. So that doesn't come to us with regard to what goes on outside our boundaries. This is the problem of nation state and the problem of boundaries. What goes after beyond our boundaries is seen to be not legitimate.
Correct.
And not of interest, not of national interest actually.
Yes.
So there are many examples which can be given. One of which is the region of Riau Lingga. Riau Lingga is in the border region. It is close proximity to Malaysia, but at the same time it is far because it is now in Indonesia. But many of the activities of the Malay world, especially in terms of the intellectual development, was based in Riau Lingga. Pulau Penyengat was a center for Malay Enlightenment. And this was also part of maritime culture. In the context of maritime history, maritime civilization. So this is because of the division of nation states. Yeah, I'm looking at the chat. There are no questions. Any comments?
This one from,
okay, that's one. Dalam siri syarahan peradaban maritime Melayu. Saya ada satu soalan lagi. Saya dapat muka Ma'aruf. Cik Ma'aruf ada soalan? Tak dengar.
Muhammad Azizi.
Ya. Cik Ma'aruf.
Ada rupa ada tadi.
Speaker kita, penceramah kita pertama.
Yang pertama, nampak tadi.
Ya. Ada
boleh dengar?
Boleh.
Okay, I think saya cakap bahasa Inggeris. I think we must congratulate Professor Murad, Professor Murad for having initiated this series of lectures. This series of lectures where about 17 speakers will be speaking. I think there must be an ambition in this project that has been started by Professor Murad. An ambition which is, I think, we not only to be pursued by Malaysia, but also by Philippines, Indonesia, Brunei. I think what we can do after the end of the series is to propose a recast of our history. A recast of our history, not to be seen as just the histories of countries, but a history of an archipelago.
Yeah, sure.
So that the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, Singapore as well, we recast our history. We must see our history as one, not just an archipelago history, but specifically maritime history. I think this kind of historical approach is something that has never been tried anywhere in the world, and we are the biggest and perhaps the only maritime civilization, and we can pave the way towards a recasting of history. Jadi perhaps this kind of idea may be brought to the Philippines, for instance, whoever go to the Philippines among us, so that the Philippines especially are very keen on crossing political borders in the archipelago, in the interpretation of history. Yes, I think we have to do that, because the fact is we have not, as an archipelago, we have not, as a maritime civilization, we have not, as a people, documented our maritime knowledge, which are a lot about navigation, about seamanship, about the building of boats and ships, not just ships, not just boats, both of them. Because in the Pacific Islands, they don't have ships, they have boats or canoes. That is a kind of maritime world by itself. Jadi a lot of these things can be integrated so that we have one single maritime history led by us in the archipelago.
Inshallah.
I think that needs to be done. But for instance, the sail itself, the Latin sail, for most of the time when people wrote about sails, it was believed that Latin sail was invented by the Mediterranean people. But lately, especially from the 1970s, 80s, people are beginning to recognize the Latin sail was invented in the archipelago. And it was from the archipelago by the traders of the Malay people who crossed the Indian Ocean that the people in the Indian Ocean pick up the idea of the Latin sail and then transmitted to the Mediterranean. And it was, as has been suggested, that it was with the aid of the Latin sail invented by the Malays that brought the Portuguese to conquer the Malays. This is one of those uncanny thing about history. So this is the kind of a recast of our history that I think we need to do. And it's very good that Professor Ahmad Murad has started this series. And I hope with this series, at the end of it, we can spur the government, the three governments, to do a recasting of our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Jarif. Yeah, one of the things that also the civilization and cultural interaction that has produced new ways of looking at things and new technologies and new forms. And also recasting of history, also recasting of national history, looking into national history and looking into Malay archipelago as a civilization. As you have always advocated, a civilization approach to Malay nations in the archipelago. So we look forward to further discussions on this. I have only one last question. I have to look at the chat. One last question which demands a brief answer from the speaker. This is on Enrique. The question is Enrique the Black, should Enrique the Black be celebrated as a national hero, since he was the one who led the way for the Spanish to arrive at the Philippines, which led to the colonization and Christianization of the Philippines? So, Saleh, that's the question. Should Enrique the Black be celebrated as a national hero?
Yes, I believe he should. I believe he should. And we should understand also his position. He was acquired by Magellan, after the fall of Malacca. And when he was taken home to first Portugal and then to Spain, according to Pigafetta, he was more or less Christianized. But we're not sure whether he really lived up to the name of being a Christian or not. Yeah. Okay. What happened is like this, especially the 2-3 incidents in Mactan. 2 or 3 incidents in Mactan. Yes, of course, he has to perform his duty as a translator, as a moderator between the two people negotiating. That is between Magellan and Humabon, for example. Very quickly, Humabon said, okay, I accept Christianity, right? But there is an incident that is after the death of Magellan. After the death of Magellan, of course, I didn't have the time to expand on it just now. After the death of Magellan, there was this invitation coming from Humabon, to those who were still alive in the ships. It was a dinner invitation, but there is a belief, there is a thread of story which says that this might actually have been started by Enrique. By Enrique, who went to Humabon as well as to Lapu-Lapu. So there was probably a conspiration between them to either kill off the rest or what. But what happened is, when these guys, those who were left behind after Magellan was killed, they went to Humabon's palace or house. They attended the party, but they were actually poisoned. They were poisoned. So many of them passed away. So there is a belief that probably Enrique, together with Humabon, as well as the Muslim leader, that is Silapulapu. Silapulapu remained a Muslim, right? We do not know for sure what happened actually to Humabon, but probably he remained as a Christian after he has been converted. But we cannot put a blame on Enrique for the conversion, because he was at that time still very much a slave to Magellan. But once Magellan died, he went up to the brother-in-law of Magellan to claim that he must be freed now. But the fellow didn't want to free him, so that's the reason why he could have actually started this conspiracy to kill them. And there is a belief that he, after the whole troop or team left, he returned to the peninsula. And he became there is this group who are still doing the search. He changed his name to Orang Laut's name, so that the Portuguese wouldn't come after him. At that time, there was still Portuguese. The Portuguese was still in control, of Malacca and the whole area. So we cannot immediately say that he is responsible for the conversion of the whole of the Philippines. And I'm now attracted to this statement made by this lady who says that he was a Muslim. Dia kata tadi itu in Malay, in Indonesian, pria Muslim. So we cannot blame him yet. We have to do some searching. This is the, I think, part of the project.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor SALLEH. We share our gratitude on your effort and on your perspectives and suggestions. We hope that many of the things that you said would be taken up and be celebrated in some way or another in the national interest. In terms of, for example, Enrique or Panglima Awang or Panglima Hitam, that has not come to our consciousness in a proper way, and beyond what has been discussed very much earlier. With that, we end this session, our second lecture for this Tanah Air project. Thank you very much, Professor.
Welcome.
Dato' Sri Muhammad Saleh YAAPAR. Our third lecture will be on the 27th of October, titled Archaeology Maritime di Alam Lain, Sumbangan Terhadap Peradaban Manusia Sejak Zaman Prasejarah hingga Sejarah, by Associate Professor Dr. Ashari Muhammad of Institut Alam dan Tamadun Melayu, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. And we thank you, everybody, who has spent time to participate and to share this discourse with us today. And we hope to see you again in the third lecture. Assalamualaikum.